Rob, a lot of questions were asked regarding human rights and how seriously that was taken at this summit. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump's response to that question?
Well, it was a very long press conference, I have to say. First of all, I don't think I've ever seen Donald Trump give such a long press conference and answer so many questions across the board. You're right, he was asked quite a lot about human rights because it didn't figure in the declaration, the four-point declaration that was signed off on by the two presidents. He said that human rights were discussed, however, and that they were important. And he suggested that there would be a link between lifting sanctions ultimately and human rights, although he wasn't very specific about it. Didn't make his point very clearly at all. He was also interesting, too, about Otto Warmbier, the American student who was in North Korea, imprisoned, and was returned dead from North Korea, or in a comatose state, and died shortly after his return to the United States. He said that he thought that his death wasn't in vain, that in somehow or other the death of Otto Warmbier had catalyzed this whole event, that both for the North Koreans and for the United States, without specifying again exactly what he meant by that. But he made that link in his own mind, and perhaps there's something in it. But he was quite strong on human rights, but he said that the main thing now is that we get this nuclear deal going, and off the back of that, when he was reminded, for instance, that there are 100,000 political prisoners in the gulags of North Korea, he said, yes, I know that, and I sympathize with those people, but once we get this deal going, perhaps things will start to improve for them then as well.
I mean, you touched on it there, Rob. There's the four-point declaration that came out of that summit between the two leaders. A lot of reference, though, from President Trump during this press conference on details that weren't put in the document that are going to be looked at later. I mean, is that quite dangerous when you don't get things down on paper and talk about tacking things on at a later stage?
Well, he did say it was a very comprehensive document. It's not really. If you look at it, it's fairly thinly sketched out what the plan is, and we knew, for instance, that the North Koreans were already agreeable to the idea of denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. The document says they will work towards denuclearization without even actually saying we will go for denuclearization. They're talking about process, and quite clearly, in return for that, the North Koreans will want concessions. It will be step by step. If they give something, they will expect the Americans to give something back as well. Donald Trump also recognized, interestingly, for the first time, that this could be a lengthy process, that it's not simply a question, as he appeared to think just a few weeks ago, that you say denuclearize, get rid of your nukes, dismantle your facilities. It's not as simple as that. It's a process that takes a long time, that the experts have to get to work at it. Dismantling takes a long time. It could take as long as 15 years. So he appeared to recognize that, although saying that he thought if you got 20% down the way, that would already be advanced so far down the process of denuclearization that it would be impossible for North Koreans to go back on it. But I thought one of the most interesting points that he made on the area that was outside of the actual declaration itself was on what sort of security arrangements the United States were prepared to make to North Korea as a reward for them pursuing the nuclear process. And the most interesting ones were on security. He said, first of all, that we will not be pulling our troops out of South Korea anytime soon, although that was something that you would like to do in the more or less distant future. But most interestingly, he said what we will be doing is stopping the military exercises, which is something that really has agitated the North Koreans for a long time. Very big military exercises that take place at several times during the year, with bombers coming in, as you mentioned, from Guam and so on, practicing bombing runs on presumably North Korea.
And very expensive, he said.
Very expensive, he said, but also, he said, extremely provocative towards North Korea. So that's an interesting concession that he's prepared to make.